Amara James stepped out of the cramped community center, the heavy wooden doors creaking slightly as they swung shut behind her. The cool evening air wrapped around her like a refreshing embrace, soothing her after the hours spent indoors. The lingering scent of freshly brewed coffee filled her senses, a delightful reminder of the successful neighborhood meeting she had just facilitated. It had been a lengthy gathering, but her heart swelled with a profound sense of accomplishment. The residents of Harmony Heights had united in purpose to confront the persistent issues plaguing their community. Specifically, the incessant noise and unsightly litter coming from the nearby construction site that had disrupted their tranquil lives for far too long. After much discussion and passionate debates, the city had finally made a promise to take action, signaling a much-needed change. As Amara reflected on the evening's successes, she couldn't help but feel proud. It was her tireless efforts, her late nights of planning, her countless conversations with residents, and her ability to advocate passionately for their concerns that had made this progress possible. "Great job, Amara," exclaimed Mrs. Jenkins, one of the oldest residents of Harmony Heights, as she shuffled past, her wrinkles deepening into a warm smile. Her voice, tinged with gratitude and respect, rang in the evening air. "Couldn't have done it without you." Amara nodded graciously, feeling a rush of warmth at the kind words. She smiled back at Mrs. Jenkins, her heart lighter than before, her eyes darting about the dispersing crowd as she scanned for any remaining stragglers who might still need assistance. She had always considered herself not just a community organizer, but a bridge builder, someone with a unique knack for bringing people together, transforming a cacophony of individual complaints into a harmonious symphony of agreement. As the last few residents gathered their belongings and exchanged farewells, Amara stepped back to take in the scene. Laughter and animated conversations filled the air around her, a stark contrast to the earlier tension that had thrummed through the meeting. It gave her a sense of purpose, a reassurance that her work was making a real difference. She thought of all the discussions she had facilitated, escaping from the old narratives that often divided them, focusing instead on the common grounds they shared. Amara cherished these moments, not just as victories, but as steps toward a stronger, more connected community. With a satisfied sigh, she pulled out her phone to jot down a few notes while the thoughts were still fresh in her mind. There was still much to be done, and she felt invigorated by the challenges that lay ahead. Whether it was organizing follow-up meetings or rallying volunteers for future community events, Amara was ready to roll up her sleeves and dig in. In her heart, she knew that each small victory represented a larger movement toward the kind of vibrant, cohesive neighborhood they all dreamed of, where everyone played a part in building not just a community, but a family. As she locked the center's doors behind her, a figure emerged from the shadows, the moonlight catching the sharp angles of his face. It was Judge Charles R. Hartwell, a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones throughout the community, accompanied by a palpable mix of fear and loathing. People often shared knowing glances when he passed, stories swirling around like autumn leaves in the wind. A fierce and imposing figure, he was the embodiment of authority in Harmony Heights, a small town where the sparks of injustice often ignited into raging fires of discontent. His stern gaze bore intently into her, piercing and cold, as if attempting to see through her very soul. The muscles in his face were taut, his expression unreadable, a mask of enigmatic control, like a seasoned chess player who had mastered the art of intimidation. As he approached her with deliberate steps, The air between them thickened with tension. "Miss James," he began, his voice gruff but measured, each word dripping with a weight that filled the space around them. "I noticed your involvement in tonight's proceedings." The emphasis he placed on the word involvement stung like a slap, suggesting more than mere observation. It was a thinly veiled accusation couched in politeness. Amara's stomach tightened in response, a coil of anxiety twisting in her gut. She was acutely aware of Hartwell's reputation, known for his dismissive and often disparaging attitude towards the Black residents of Harmony Heights. His very presence here felt like an unwelcome ghost arising from a dark past, a reminder of the battles still being fought on the streets and in the hearts of her people. "Your contributions were enlightening," he continued, and she could detect the hint of sarcasm entwined in his words, like a serpent hiding in the grass. "But let's not forget the law is in place for a reason. Your kind shouldn't meddle in matters they don't understand." His words struck her like a bitter winter wind, chilling her resolve and igniting an uneasy mixture of anger and indignation. Amara stood her ground, refusing to flinch under his scrutiny. In the shadows around them, trees whispered and the wind howled, but she remained rooted in her conviction, determined not to let his oppressive words dim the flicker of hope she held for her community. She had fought too hard to give in now. She owed it to the people who had suffered under the weight of ignorance and injustice. The darkness around her felt infinite, yet within her burned a flame of courage, one that Hartwell, for all his authority, could not extinguish. "Judge Hartwell," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions raging within her. "The law should serve all people, not just the privileged few. I will not be silenced, nor will I allow others to be dismissed merely for standing up for what is right." Each word was a declaration, a defiance against the shadows that threatened to engulf her. It was time for the truth to emerge, even if it meant standing alone against the tide of oppression. Amara felt the weight of his words hit her with the harshness of a slap across the face, a visceral reaction that sent a jolt of indignation coursing through her. It was as if the gravity of his contempt had suspended the air around her, leaving her momentarily speechless. She inhaled deeply, drawing in the cool air to steady herself, reminding her racing thoughts of the respect she had worked hard to cultivate for the office he held, regardless of the deep disdain she held for the man occupying it. "Judge Hartwell," she replied, her voice calm and deliberate, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife slicing through butter. "I truly believe that everyone, regardless of their background or status, has a fundamental right to be heard. It is essential for us to come together if we are to work towards a better community for all of us." Her gaze locked onto his, firm and unwavering, refusing to be intimidated by his dismissive stance. He scoffed derisively, shaking his head with a dismissive smirk, a dramatic gesture that reeked of arrogance. "I've seen your kind before, Miss James. You're all full of dreams and empty promises," he retorted, his voice laced with condescension. "But this is the real world, a harsh and unforgiving place where people like me are the ones who make the decisions that matter. It's easy to spout ideals when you haven't had to deal with the realities that come with power." The mocking disappointment in his tone hung heavy in the air, a challenge she felt compelled to rise to. Amara clenched her fists, her mind racing with strategies to counter his skeptical worldview. How could he not see the importance of empathy and collaboration? Could he not understand that true progress often emerged from the voices he sought to silence? But more than that, this was a pivotal moment, a test of her conviction against the cynical pragmatism of those in power. The fight within her stirred to life, threatening to spill over. Without another word, he turned sharply on his heel and strode away, his footsteps echoing against the cobbled street, leaving Amara standing alone beneath the cloak of darkness. The night enveloped her in silence, yet within her a tempest was brewing, a chaotic swirl of thoughts and emotions clamoring for her attention. She had encountered his kind before, those men who wielded power with an iron fist, using it like a weapon to reinforce a status quo that ensured their dominion over others. Their arrogance and ruthlessness fueled her determination, igniting a spark of resolve deep within her. She knew she couldn't allow his dismissive words to deter her from her mission, not now, not ever. She had come too far, and the stakes were far too high. The following day dawned with a muted light that seemed to reflect Amara's anxiety as she found herself seated in the back of the courtroom. Her heart raced with each passing moment, pounding like a drum as the judge, a figure of authority clad in a somber black robe, took his seat with a definitive thud that reverberated around the room. This was no ordinary day. She had been summoned to appear for a minor offense she had committed while valiantly mediating the community dispute that had erupted like wildfire among her neighbors. Still, the atmosphere in the room felt charged, as if everyone were holding their breath in anticipation of the judge's upcoming ruling. The courtroom was heavy with tension, an oppressive hush settling among the gathered crowd, punctuated only by the rustling of papers and the soft scuff of shoes against the polished floor. As the judge peered over his spectacles, the lenses reflecting a glimmer of authority, his sharp gaze unexpectedly locked onto Amara. She felt a chill run down her spine, a sudden jolt of fear mixed with adrenaline. The weight of his scrutiny felt almost tangible, as if his eyes could pierce through her defenses and lay bare her innermost thoughts. She straightened her back, willing herself to hold his gaze, reminding herself of why she was here. She was not just a defendant in this case. She was a voice for the unheard, a beacon of hope for her community. As she sat silently, her thoughts began to swirl again, replaying the tension of the previous night with him. She could not afford to lose sight of her mission, the very essence of her purpose. The judge's gavel was the sound of a heartbeat, and she had come to advocate for change, to stand firm against the tide of injustice that threatened to engulf her community. In this moment, with all eyes on her, she would not allow herself to become a pawn in someone else's game. The anticipation built palpably in the air around her, but the resolve within her grew stronger, setting the stage for a pivotal moment in both her life and the lives of those she sought to protect. "Miss James," he said, his voice reverberating through the grand chamber, each word dripping with authority. "You seem to think you're above the law." The silence that followed was palpable. The assembled audience leaned in, their eyes flickering between the judge and the defendant, waiting for the compelling drama to unfold. Her hands trembled slightly as she mustered the courage to stand and face the court, the weight of the room pressing down on her. Despite the fear coursing through her veins, her voice emerged with a surprising steadiness. "Your Honor," she began, her tone earnest yet defiant, "I was only trying to help." She felt the intensity of the judge's gaze piercing through her, trying to gauge her resolve. Judge Hartwell leaned back in his ornate chair, the leather creaking under his weight, a hint of a sneer playing at the corners of his mouth, a blend of disdain and skepticism flashing across his features. "And what makes you think you know better than the established legal system?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension, as if mocking her idealism. Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself beneath the scrutinizing eyes of everyone present. She refused to let the judge's demeanor intimidate her. Her gaze remained unwavering, locked onto his as she spoke with passion. "Because, Your Honor," she articulated, her voice gaining strength, "I know the struggles of this community intimately. I understand their pain, their fears, the injustices that often go unaddressed. And sometimes the harsh reality is, what the law provides simply isn't enough to protect those who are vulnerable." Her words hung in the air, filled with a mixture of challenge and desperation, illuminating the tension that crackled in the chamber. With a decisive bang of his gavel, Judge Hartwell brought the session to a close, a sound that echoed through the stillness of the courtroom. His stern gaze swept across the room, lingering slightly on Amara before he delivered his parting words with a certain finality. "Fine. But let this be a lesson to you. Stick to your own kind." The words landed heavily in the air, sharp as a blade, carrying a weight of disdain that Amara couldn't ignore. Though they stung painfully, a fiery determination ignited within her. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, and walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, even as her heart raced with a tumult of emotions. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, replaying the injustices she had just witnessed and bracing herself for the battles that lay ahead in this fight for fairness, a fight she knew was far from over. As she stepped through the heavy wood door, her departure not unnoticed, a familiar voice called out to her from behind. "Amara, what happened?" Rachel exclaimed as she rushed over, concern etched across her features. Rachel was a fellow strategist for Senator Marcus Walker's campaign, a passionate advocate for change, known for her relentless dedication. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with urgency and worry. Amara wasted no time recounting her encounter with Judge Hartwell, her voice trembling with a mix of indignation and disbelief. Each word poured forth like a dam breaking, fueled by the frustration of the situation and the injustice she felt. Rachel listened, her expression shifting from concern to simmering fury with every detail Amara shared. The anger was palpable, and it built like a tempest within them. "That's it," Rachel declared, her voice resolute, cutting through the haze of indignation. "We're going to make sure everyone knows about this." As she spoke, the fire in Rachel's eyes ignited a shared passion between them. Amara felt a surge of hope rekindle within her, the idea of rallying not only their colleagues, but perhaps even the wider community around their cause. Together, they could amplify their voices and create a ripple effect that reached far beyond the confines of the courtroom. The real work was just beginning, but with Rachel by her side, Amara felt more prepared for whatever lay ahead. They would not bow to intolerance. They would rise above it and fight for justice, for themselves and for everyone who had ever been silenced. The news spread through the campaign like wildfire, rapidly igniting a fervor among supporters and constituents alike. Within mere hours of its emergence, the shocking story of the racist judge had permeated every corner of social media. Tweets, posts, and shares cascaded across platforms, each adding fuel to the firestorm of outrage and empathy directed toward Amara. The pervasive sentiment was clear. The community was not going to stand by in silence. As the narrative gained momentum, Senator Walker's office found itself inundated with an overwhelming number of calls from reporters, all clamoring for a statement. The inquiries poured in like a tidal wave, each journalist eager to unearth the senator's perspective on the explosive allegations against Judge Hartwell. The atmosphere was charged with urgency, signaling that this was not just a fleeting issue, but a profound moment that demanded a response. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Senator Walker convened an emergency meeting with his team, his visage reflecting a mask of determination and resolve. "We can't let this slide," he asserted with conviction. Amara's experience is just one glaring example of the systemic racism that plagues our country, insidiously embedding itself in our institutions. This is a crucial moment, and we need to seize it as a catalyst for meaningful change. His words resonated deeply, galvanizing the team as they prepared to formulate a robust response to the unfolding crisis. As the night cloaked the office in darkness, the team engaged in a fervent brainstorming session, fueled by coffee and passion. Ideas bounced around the table like sparks, each member contributing their insights in hopes of crafting a comprehensive plan that would not only expose Judge Hartwell's blatant bigotry, but would also serve as a springboard for tangible legislative action. They deliberated on strategies that could effectively capture the public's attention and sustain the momentum they were building. After hours of heated discussion, a consensus emerged. They resolved to publicly highlight Amara's pivotal role in their recent victory, a triumph that had previously gone unrecognized amidst the chaos. By showcasing her contributions and using her story as a powerful emblem of resilience against prejudice, they aimed to illuminate the broader issue of racial discrimination in the judiciary. The plan morphed into a bold initiative where they would call for a comprehensive review of judicial practices, advocating for judicial reform that would ensure fairness, accountability, and equality for all. With palpable excitement, the team felt a renewed sense of purpose, envisioning a movement that could resonate beyond their immediate circles and potentially enact lasting change. They were ready to turn the tide, armed with determination and the undeniable truth that Amara's experience must not only be acknowledged, but must also serve as a rallying point for all those who had endured similar injustices. Amara was hesitant, her heart pounding in her chest as she contemplated the weight of her decision. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice trembling slightly with uncertainty. "We're fighting for so much more than personal vindication." She looked out the window, gazing at the world beyond, where people were going about their daily lives, oblivious to the turmoil she felt inside. The shadows of the past loomed large over her, and she understood that her struggle was not an isolated one. Rachel, sensing Amara's trepidation, stepped closer and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The warmth of her touch conveyed solidarity and strength. "You're right," Rachel said firmly, meeting Amara's gaze with determination. "It's about everyone who's suffered under his rule. Think about all the countless lives that have been affected by his prejudice and arrogance. By speaking out, you're giving them a voice." Her words resonated in the stillness of the moment, igniting a spark of resolve within Amara's heart. The next morning, as dawn broke and the world began to stir, the story exploded onto the national scene. Amara's name became a rallying cry on the lips of journalists and activists alike as she transformed into a potent symbol of resilience in the face of systemic injustice. Her face, once familiar only to the people of her small town, was now plastered across news outlets and social media feeds. Her words, filled with courage and truth, echoed through living rooms across the country, resonating with those who had felt voiceless for far too long. Meanwhile, Judge Hartwell, who had previously wielded his power with impunity, found himself at the heart of an intense media maelstrom. the carefully constructed facade of respectability that he had maintained for years began to crack under the relentless scrutiny. His past racist rulings were no longer mere whispers in dark corners. They were dissected in the light of day, scrutinized by pundits and everyday citizens alike. The pressure of public outrage mounted, and with it, the calls for his impeachment grew louder, ringing in the halls of justice like a clarion call for change. It became clear that Amara's bravery had not only illuminated her plight, but had also ignited a much larger movement against the entrenched injustice within the system, threatening to topple those who thought they were untouchable. Meanwhile, Daniel Hartwell, the estranged son of the prominent judge, sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, his heart heavy with the burden of personal conflict. The soft glow of his computer screen illuminated his face, casting shadows that mirrored the turmoil within him. As a journalist, Daniel was no stranger to difficult stories, but this one struck particularly close to home. He had been following the unfolding events in Harmony Heights with keen interest, his instincts honed by years of reporting. All too familiar with his father's methods, he recognized the subtle manipulation and the carefully crafted narratives that had become a hallmark of the judge's career. With a deep, resigned sigh, Daniel felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a lead blanket. He understood that this had the potential to alter the course of their lives forever, not just for him, but for his father as well. The tension between them had long been palpable, rooted in disagreements that had grown into a chasm too wide to bridge. But now, in this moment of clarity, he felt compelled to act. He reached for his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed the familiar number of his editor. The connection buzzed, and as the call connected, Daniel steeled himself, ready to unleash a truth that had long been buried beneath a veneer of respectability. "I have a story," he stated firmly, his voice steadier than he felt. "And it's going to blow the lid off Harmony Heights." The article that Daniel set to work on was not just another feature. It was a damning expose that peeled back the layers of his father's seemingly illustrious career. Inside its pages, he detailed the judge's troubling affiliations with a local white supremacist group, revelations that shocked him to unearth. He meticulously chronicled the numerous biased rulings that had shattered lives within the Black community, veering from justice into a realm of prejudice and corruption. As he typed furiously, each keystroke felt like both a liberation and a betrayal. His fingers practically danced across the keyboard, fueled by a fierce urgency. This was not merely a professional endeavor, it was a moral imperative. Daniel grappled with the risk involved, knowing the fallout could be catastrophic, not just for his father, whose reputation would likely be irrevocably damaged, but also for himself, who could become a pariah in their family. Yet, deep inside, he sensed a call to duty, a relentless awareness that the truth had to be brought into the light. His heart raced as he reviewed the evidence he had painstakingly gathered, interviews with dozens of community members, court documents, and even photographs that bore witness to the judge's affiliations. He knew that silence was complicity, and as a journalist, it was his job to expose wrongdoings, regardless of the personal cost. This was about justice, about giving a voice to those who had been silenced for far too long, and Daniel was willing to risk everything to ensure that his father's actions did not go unchallenged. The truth had to be told, and he was prepared to face the consequences of his revelations. As he hit send on the final draft to his editor, he felt a strange sense of liberation wash over him, coupled with an overwhelming grief for the father who would no longer be the man he once knew. In that moment, He understood that some truths are too powerful to remain hidden, and sometimes the hardest stories, those that tear families apart, are the ones that need to be told the most. As the damning story broke, the Hartwell family name was dragged through the mud, subjected to public scrutiny and shame. This scandal threatened to dismantle everything that Judge Hartwell had built over decades of hard work and dedication to the legal system. Daniel, standing at a distance, watched helplessly as his father's world crumbled around him, the teaching of integrity and justice that had been instilled in him suddenly appearing to be a bitter irony. The weight of his own complicity in the shadows loomed heavy on his conscience, pressing down like a dark cloud that seemed to obscure the very principles he held dear. Questions raced through his mind. Was he responsible for his father's fall? Had he overlooked the signs that led to this chaos? Yet, amidst the despair and turmoil, a flicker of hope emerged, glimmering through the darkness. Daniel couldn't shake the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, this devastating scandal was the wake-up call his father desperately needed. A chance not just for reflection, but for profound change. Could the reckoning that had befallen the Hartwell name ignite a transformation that would lead to justice? Real justice? This possibility anchored Daniel, providing a fragile thread of optimism amidst the ruins. Across the city, Amara stood tall as her voice grew stronger with each interview and speech she delivered. Her words resonated powerfully with the hearts of those who had suffered at the hands of injustice, echoing in the chambers of communities that had long been silenced. The Hartwell-James Act began to take shape within this tempest. It was a bold legislative proposal that aimed to require mandatory racial sensitivity training for all judicial officials, as well as establish a committee designed to tackle systemic biases that had woven themselves into the very fabric of the legal system. The urgency of the moment propelled the movement forward, and Amara's leadership shone as a beacon of hope for many. In the midst of the media frenzy, the lives of Daniel and Amara intersected once more, but this time under vastly different circumstances. The chaos swirled around them, but they found solace in a quiet cafe, far removed from the relentless attention of reporters and cameras. As they sat across from each other, their conversation evolved into a space where they could share their burdens, an exchange woven together with threads of shared pain, introspection, and a burgeoning understanding of the realities they both faced. With sincerity, Daniel recounted the complicated legacy of his father's past, the shadows that loomed over their family. He opened up about the fear and guilt he felt, the discomfort of holding privilege while witnessing the tribulations of others. Amara listened intently, her eyes filled with empathy as he spoke, each word drawing them closer together in a world that often sought to divide. In that moment, they found not only common ground, but a shared resolve to confront the realities of their circumstances and the potential for a better future. In the warmth of a simple conversation, they began to envision a path forward, one where their combined strength and courage could indeed initiate the profound change they both longed for. "We can't let this define us," she said, her voice soft but firm, embodying a quiet strength that resonated in the tense atmosphere. Her eyes, filled with determination, locked onto his as she made her point clear. "We have to focus on the future, on making sure this never happens again." The words hung in the air, a declaration of their resolve, a promise to rise above the shadows of their past. Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening in response to her unwavering conviction. "I'm with you," he declared, his voice steady and unyielding. "I'll do whatever it takes to help." As the weight of the situation pressed down on them, his commitment solidified, ignited by a newfound purpose that filled the void left by despair. Their unlikely alliance began to blossom and grow stronger with each passing day, fueled by a shared vision of justice and accountability. Together, they embarked on a journey that would test their limits and challenge the very fabric of the institutions they sought to reform. Daniel used his journalistic skills, honed through years of dedication, to sift through mountains of documents and uncover damning evidence of his father's misdeeds. Each revelation felt like a small victory, pushing them closer to their goal. Meanwhile, Amara leveraged her political savvy and keen understanding of the legislative process to skillfully navigate the treacherous waters of Congress. With calculated precision, she built coalitions, rallied support, and faced off against those who sought to maintain the status quo. The tensions in the political arena were palpable, but she remained undeterred, embodying the spirit of hope and change. Together, they became a formidable force, an embodiment of the notion that unity could indeed be forged from adversity. Their dynamic partnership served as a beacon of light, drawing attention to the flaws within the system and inspiring others to join their call for reform. As they gained traction, their voices echoed through the halls of power, igniting a movement that could no longer be ignored. Judge Hartwell, now a distant figure in the narrative, watched their efforts unfold with a heavy heart. The son he had pushed away, the very embodiment of his own failures, was now fighting passionately for the very changes he had spent a lifetime resisting. The juxtaposition of their paths weighed heavily on him as he reflected on his decisions, the missed opportunities, the harsh words spoken in anger, and the walls he had built around himself. The bittersweet realization of his failures as both a father and a judge began to take root in his mind, threatening to overwhelm him. He understood that he could not change the past, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way to contribute to a future where justice prevailed. He knew he had to make amends, to reconcile with his own conscience, and to do whatever he could to ensure that the legal system served all Americans fairly, regardless of their background. In this complex tapestry of relationships and aspirations, hope flickered like a candle in the dark, urging them all to persevere, to strive for a better tomorrow, and ultimately to embrace the power of transformation. One evening, as he sat alone in the dimly lit, now desolate office that once buzzed with activity and ambition, he felt the weight of his past pressing down on him like an oppressive blanket. The walls, adorned with echoes of meetings long gone and the chatter of colleagues who had since distanced themselves, felt unwelcoming and cold. He picked up the phone, its surface cool and foreign to his touch, and dialed Amara's number, his heart racing with uncertainty. As the phone rang, his mind swirled with doubt and regret. Memories of his previous actions flooded his thoughts, painting a stark picture of the man he had been, a man who had contributed to the very divisions that now tore at the fabric of his community. Finally, a familiar voice answered, and he steadied himself, trying to inject confidence into his shaky voice. "I want to help," he said, the sincerity in his tone breaking through the tremor. "I want to be part of the solution." Amara's initial response was one of shock. The accusation held within her tone was almost palpable as she asked, "Why now?" Skepticism laced her words, a natural defense from someone who had seen too many empty promises come and go. It was fair. After all, it was easy to question the motives of a man haunted by his history, especially one who had wielded power that had often hurt rather than healed. "Because it's never too late to do the right thing," he replied, his tone earnest, pleading for her to see that he was more than his past mistakes. With those words hung the fragile hope of redemption, a chance to transform the narrative that had long defined him. The conversation that followed marked the beginning of a tumultuous journey towards atonement. They discussed plans and possibilities, strategies for bridging the chasm that had formed between the town's diverse communities. But deep inside, Hartwell grappled with the daunting question of whether his change of heart would be enough to sway both the public and the entrenched political elite who had long viewed him through a lens tainted by his previous actions. Would his sudden pledge of goodwill, his desire for change, somehow overshadow the legacy of racism that followed him like a stubborn shadow? As the tension of the moment began to fade, Hartwell knew he was standing at a crossroads. He felt a flicker of hope igniting within him, mixed with the fear of rejection by those he had wronged. Then came the town hall meeting, a pivotal moment swirling with anticipation and bubbling with raw emotions. The room was a melting pot of voices, filled with residents who had come, each carrying their own narratives and expectations, eager to hear from the two figures standing as symbolic representations of the stark divide in their community. Amidst the crowd, murmurs of skepticism mixed with a few whispers of hopeful curiosity spread like fire through the assembled residents. When Judge Hartwell finally took the stage, the air grew thick with tension, and an almost electric atmosphere filled the hall. Eyes burned into him, scrutinizing his every move, every hesitation in his speech, every flicker of emotion crossing his face. Here, under the glaring spotlight, he faced not only the crowd, but the monumental task of dismantling the walls he had helped to erect, brick by brick. Would he find the strength to advocate for unity and healing? Or would the weight of his past actions prove too heavy to bear as he stood before his community, desperate to redefine himself once and for all? He spoke of his past mistakes, a series of missteps that defined his early years in a world where he often felt lost and misled. With a weighty seriousness in his voice, he reflected on his ignorance, those moments when he had turned a blind eye to the struggles of others, moments marked by a profound lack of understanding and empathy that still haunted him. His regret hung heavily in the air as he recounted the choices he had made that led to missed opportunities for connection and change. As he outlined the relentless work he had been conducting behind the scenes, often unnoticed and unacknowledged, to support the Hartwell-James Act, he conveyed the depth of his commitment to the cause. He explained the late nights spent researching, the countless hours invested in conversations with stakeholders, and the tireless advocacy that had fueled his resolve. Then, with trembling hands that betrayed the gravity of the moment, he offered his public endorsement of the bill, each word laced with sincerity and resolve. In response, the crowd erupted in a cacophony of anger and disbelief. The air was thick with tension as audible gasps and shouts echoed throughout the room. Yet, as he sat beside Amara, an unwavering strength radiating from his gaze, something began to shift in the atmosphere. Slowly, imperceptibly, the tide of anger began to recede, giving way to a tentative hope, a whisper of what could be if the walls of division were broken down. Their conversation, raw and honest, stood in stark contrast to the often rehearsed and polished speeches, the carefully crafted sound bites, and scripted debates that typically filled the airwaves. In that charged moment, it became a dialogue that transcended party lines and political maneuvering. It was an invitation for the audience to confront their own deeply held prejudices and consider the genuine possibility of change. As the town hall concluded, the applause erupted. transforming into a standing ovation that felt almost electric. It was a response fueled not just by the words spoken, but by the sense of unity that had begun to blossom in that room. The story of the unlikely alliance forged between Judge Hartwell and Amara James rapidly became the talk of the nation. It transformed into a compelling narrative of redemption, illustrating the immense power of unity in the face of adversity. Their journey, fraught with challenges yet illuminated by shared hope, inspired countless others to dare to dream of a better future, collectively striving toward a common goal. As they walked out of the building together, the cool night air offering a reprieve from the intense energy inside, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous had just occurred. Hartwell's public admission had been unexpected, and the way the community had responded had left her both hopeful and wary.